He had everything, billion-dollar companies, mansions, private jets, yet he felt completely empty inside. So one day, this billionaire did something the world called crazy. He gave it all away and went to live on the streets. For weeks, he slept on sidewalks, ate from trash bins, and met people no one else even noticed. But one night, a poor 12-year-old boy, homeless, barefoot, and hungry, changed everything. That boy didn't have food, money, or even shoes, but what he did would humble the richest man alive. Because when you have nothing, sometimes you see life more clearly than anyone else. And what that boy taught him about kindness, purpose, and the true meaning of wealth will leave you speechless. Stay till the end, because what happens next will change how you see success forever. Welcome to BrainFuel, where real stories spark real change. Here, we uncover powerful moments that remind us what it means to dream, to fight, and to rise again. So hit that subscribe button, and let's fuel your mind with stories that move your soul. This is BrainFuel. The city lights stretched endlessly below him, glowing like liquid gold. From the top of his 92nd floor penthouse, Ethan Cole could see everything. Every streetlight, every tower, every sign that said success. But that night, none of it looked beautiful. The skyline that once made him proud now felt cold, distant, meaningless. Inside his glass-walled apartment, everything sparkled. The marble floors, the chandelier worth more than most people's homes, even the trophies lined up on the wall. Entrepreneur of the Year, Forbes 40 Under 40, Businessman of the Decade. But the man who owned them sat in silence, his suit still perfectly pressed, his tie loosened, his eyes empty. Ethan had built an empire from nothing. He was the orphan who turned a garage startup into a billion-dollar tech company. He was a man every magazine called a genius of the digital age. People wrote books about his success. Students quoted his speeches. Other billionaires called him for advice. But what they didn't know was that behind the confident smile, behind the tailored suits, was a man who felt absolutely alone. His assistant had left hours ago. His security guard stood outside the door, and the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the city below. On his massive dining table sat untouched plates from the finest restaurant in Manhattan. He'd ordered them out of habit, not hunger. He picked up a piece of steak, stared at it, and sighed. It didn't taste like anything anymore. He looked at his reflection in the glass wall. "Is this it?" he muttered to himself. "All this, and I still feel nothing." Ethan had spent years chasing one thing, more. More money, more power, more recognition. He told himself that once he reached the top, he'd finally be happy. But every time he hit a new milestone, the emptiness grew louder. There was no joy in the deals anymore. No thrill in winning. No peace at night. That evening, he scrolled through his phone, news articles, stock updates, congratulatory messages. But something else caught his eye, a video thumbnail on his feed. It showed a homeless man smiling as he gave away his only blanket to another person sleeping on the street. The caption read, "He owns nothing but gives everything." Ethan tapped it. In the video, the man said, "You don't need $1 million to be rich. You just need a heart that knows how to give." Ethan froze. Those words pierced through the walls he'd built around his soul. He replayed the video again and again. The man had nothing. No house, no job, no fame, and yet he looked genuinely happy. Ethan couldn't remember the last time he'd felt that way. That night, for the first time in years, he didn't fall asleep to the sound of stock alerts or conference calls. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring into the darkness, thinking about the one thing money couldn't buy, peace. When the sun began to rise, Ethan still hadn't moved. His assistant, Laura, knocked on his door early that morning. "Sir, your 8 a.m. meeting is confirmed with the investors," she said. Ethan didn't answer. "Sir?" she repeated, slightly nervous. He looked at her calmly and said, "Cancel it." Laura blinked. "Cancel it? But it's about the merger." "I know," Ethan interrupted softly. "Cancel everything. For the next month." Laura stood frozen. "You mean everything?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, everything." She tried to laugh it off, assuming it was one of his strange mood swings. All right, sir, I'll move it to next week. But he shook his head. No, Laura, I'm serious. He looked her straight in the eyes. I'm leaving. I don't know when I'll be back. That afternoon, Ethan walked into his company headquarters for what might have been the last time. The employees greeted him with admiration and excitement. They didn't notice the tired look in his eyes. In the elevator, he stood surrounded by people, but felt more isolated than ever. He stepped out onto the top floor, looked around his sleek glass office, his throne of success, and whispered to himself, none of this feels real anymore. His longtime business partner, Daniel, walked in with a grin. Ethan, you ready for the press conference? They're going to announce you as the richest under 40 CEO in America. Ethan didn't smile. He stared out the window and said, Daniel, do you ever wonder what it's all for? Daniel frowned. What do you mean? This, Ethan said, gesturing at the skyscrapers. The money, the stress, the endless chase. What if we've been climbing the wrong mountain? Daniel chuckled uneasily. You sound like you need a vacation. But Ethan just smiled faintly. Maybe I need something deeper. He reached into his desk, pulled out a sealed envelope, and handed it to Daniel. You'll understand later. Then he walked out. Hours later, he returned to his penthouse and did something unthinkable. He transferred his wealth, every share, every asset, into a foundation account managed by trustees he trusted. They'd use it to fund shelters, schools, and community programs. He kept only $20 in cash. He looked around one last time at the luxury he once worshipped, the gold watches, the custom furniture, the rare paintings. He smiled sadly. Goodbye, he whispered. Then he grabbed a small backpack, put on a plain hoodie, and walked out the door. The elevator ride down felt endless. When the doors opened, he stepped out not as Ethan Cole, billionaire tech mogul, but as a man no one would recognize. He walked into the busy streets of Manhattan, feeling both terrified and free. People rushed past him, talking on phones, sipping coffee, hailing taxis. Nobody looked twice at him. For the first time, he was invisible. He wandered for hours until the sun began to set. The city that once looked beautiful from his penthouse window now looked harsh and unforgiving from the ground. He passed alleys filled with people huddled under blankets, faces tired but still alive. That night, he found an empty corner near a subway station. He sat down, his back against the cold brick wall. The smell of garbage stung his nose. The concrete beneath him felt like ice. His expensive shoes, now dirty, felt ridiculous against the rough pavement. A man walked by and dropped a coin near his feet, mistaking him for someone in need. Ethan looked at the coin, then at the man who didn't even glance back. He laughed softly to himself. Guess I finally blend in. As the city lights flickered and the night grew colder, Ethan pulled his hoodie tighter. For the first time in his life, there was no plan, no schedule, no meeting. Just silence. Just life. He closed his eyes and whispered, let's see what it's really like to have nothing. He didn't know that by morning, his life would change forever, and that a small, poor black boy named Malik was about to teach him what it truly meant to be rich. Ethan's first night on the streets hit him harder than any financial crash he had ever survived. By the time the sun disappeared behind the tall buildings, the warmth of the day went with it. The air turned sharp, cold, and heavy with the smell of exhaust and garbage. He wandered through the narrow streets of Manhattan, clutching his backpack, the only thing he had left in the world. Inside it was a water bottle, a small blanket, and 20 crumpled dollars. That was all. He passed people rushing home in expensive coats, couples laughing as they hailed taxis, delivery drivers balancing pizzas on handlebars, and musicians playing on corners. Everyone had somewhere to be, everyone except him. He thought back to his penthouse, to the soft bed and heated floors. Just 24 hours ago, he'd been there, sipping imported coffee, complaining about too many meetings. Now, he would give anything for a warm chair. He tried to look confident, but every street felt like an unknown battlefield. He'd built billion-dollar companies, yet couldn't figure out where to sleep without getting arrested. By 9 p.m., he found a group of homeless people under a bridge near the East River. They sat close together, wrapped in torn blankets, passing around a plastic bottle of cheap wine. The sound of their laughter surprised him. It was real, raw, almost joyful. One man looked up. "You lost, brother?" Ethan hesitated, just looking for a place to rest. The man nodded. "Stick around, but watch your stuff. Some folks here will take your shoes if you fall asleep too deep." Ethan sat down quietly near the edge. The concrete was hard and damp. He could feel the cold seeping through his jeans. He pulled the blanket over himself, but it barely helped. The noise of the city above, the honking, the footsteps, the shouts, mixed with the sound of rats scurrying nearby. He'd never been this close to the bottom before. His body shivered, but it wasn't just the cold. It was fear, confusion, and disbelief. He tried to sleep, but his mind raced. How did life turn so fast? Yesterday, he was a man people chased for meetings. Today, no one even looked at him. He realized something painful. Being rich had made him visible, but without it, he was invisible. Around midnight, rain started to fall, light at first, then pounding. Everyone scrambled to cover their belongings. Ethan didn't know what to do. The water soaked through his clothes, the blanket, his shoes. He laughed bitterly. "Guess there's no room service out here," he muttered. A voice beside him said, "First night?" Ethan turned and saw an older man, maybe in his 60s, with a beard gone silver and eyes full of experience. He wore a faded army jacket and held a small cardboard sign that read, "Still breathing." "Yeah," Ethan said softly. "How could you tell?" The man smiled faintly. "You still smell like soap." They both chuckled. The man reached into a paper bag and pulled out half a sandwich. "Hungry?" Ethan hesitated. He wanted to say no, but his stomach growled so loud it answered for him. He took the sandwich, whispered, "Thank you," and ate slowly. It was cold, soggy, and perfect. "You'll get used to it," the man said, lighting a cigarette. "Out here, people got nothing, but sometimes they give more than the rich ever did." Ethan thought about that long after the man fell asleep. Those words echoed in his mind like a prophecy. By dawn, the rain stopped. Ethan's clothes were still wet, and his body ached from the cold concrete. He got up, stretched, and looked around. The bridge people were already packing their things, heading off to wherever survival would take them that day. He followed the flow, unsure what to do next. He spent the morning walking through the city, trying to find breakfast. Every bakery he passed smelled like heaven, but he couldn't bring himself to spend his only money yet. He stopped at a corner where volunteers handed out free coffee and pastries to the homeless. A woman with a kind face smiled at him. "First time here?" "Yeah," Ethan admitted. "Take two," she said, handing him a warm cup. "You look like you need it." The coffee burned his tongue, but warmed his heart. "Thank you," he whispered. She nodded. "Just pay it forward someday." He smiled faintly. If only you knew, he thought. He wandered for hours, seeing the city through a new lens. Every bench was a potential bed. Every alley a possible danger. Every stranger's glance carried either suspicion or pity. For the first time, he realized how hard it was to exist when the world saw you as nothing. Around evening, as the golden light faded between the buildings, Ethan stopped at a small park. That's where he saw him, a tiny figure sitting under a flickering streetlight, playing a broken harmonica. The sound was rough but somehow beautiful, echoing with soul. The boy couldn't have been more than 10. His jacket was too big, his shoes too small, and yet he played as if the world wasn't cruel. Beside him sat a crumpled paper bag and an old notebook. Ethan watched for a while, drawn by the sound. Then the boy stopped and looked up. "You look lost, mister," he said, grinning through cracked lips. Ethan blinked, startled. "I could say the same about you." The boy laughed. "Nah, I ain't lost. I just don't got nowhere to go." His voice carried no sadness, only acceptance, like he had made peace with something Ethan still didn't understand. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. "Malik." The boy said proudly, holding out his hand. Ethan shook it. "Ethan." "Cool name," Malik said. "You hungry?" "I got half a sandwich." Ethan froze. The déjà vu hit him. Someone else had offered him food just last night. It felt like the universe was trying to teach him something. "You sure?" he asked. Malik nodded. "You look hungrier than me." Ethan took it gently. "Thank you." Malik shrugged. "Ain't no thing. People helped me when I had nothing. Gotta keep the chain going." They ate together in silence for a few minutes. Then Malik asked, "You new around here? Don't look like street people." Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm just learning." "Learning what?" Ethan looked up at the gray sky. "What it's like to have nothing." Malik tilted his head. "Then you came to the right place." The boy laughed, then picked up his harmonica again, playing a soft tune. The melody was imperfect, but full of heart. Ethan sat back, listening, his soul quiet for the first time in years. That night, as they shared stories and laughed under the flickering streetlight, Ethan realized something life-changing. Sometimes the poorest people carry the richest hearts. He didn't know it yet, but this little boy, this homeless kid with a harmonica, was about to change his life forever. Malik's eyes glowed under the dim streetlight, full of life that didn't seem to fit the worn body he carried. He looked like he'd seen too much of the world too soon, yet somehow he still smiled as if it hadn't beaten him. Ethan sat beside him on the cold bench, sipping the last of his free coffee. "So, Malik," he said softly, "how long have you been out here?" The boy shrugged. "A while, I guess. 2 years? Maybe 3. I stopped counting after my last birthday." "Your last birthday?" Ethan asked gently. Malik chuckled, his harmonica still in his lap. "Yeah, I turned 10. Best birthday ever. I found a pair of shoes that almost fit." He laughed like it was a funny story, but Ethan felt a knot in his chest. He looked down at Malik's shoes. The soles were cracked, the sides torn, stuffed with cardboard to keep the cold out. Yet Malik wiggled his toes proudly. "Pretty cool, huh? Got 'em from a church box downtown." Ethan nodded slowly. "They're something." Malik grinned. "They work. That's what matters." There was something about his voice, light but grounded, that struck Ethan. He'd met CEOs, inventors, politicians, but none of them had ever sounded this sure of themselves. This kid, who slept under streetlights, somehow carried the kind of peace Ethan had been searching for his entire life. "So where's your family, Malik?" Ethan asked after a pause. Malik stopped playing with his harmonica. He stared at the ground. "My mama got sick," he said quietly. "Real sick. We used to live in this small apartment uptown. She worked all day at a diner, sometimes 2 shifts, just to keep us fed. But one day she couldn't get out of bed." Ethan listened, his throat tightening. "She told me not to worry," Malik continued. "Said the angels would watch us. But then his voice broke. She went to sleep one night and didn't wake up. For a moment, the city seemed to stop. No horns, no chatter, just silence between a billionaire and a 10-year-old boy who'd lost everything. "What about your dad?" Ethan asked softly. Malik shook his head. "He was around when I was little. Then he wasn't. Mama said he had a bad friend named the Bottle. Guess that means he liked to drink more than he liked us." Ethan felt his eyes sting. He turned away, pretending to watch the traffic. "I'm sorry, Malik." The boy shrugged again, but his voice stayed steady. "Don't be. I miss her, but she's still here." He tapped his chest. "Right here." That simple gesture hit Ethan harder than any sermon or quote he'd ever read. After a while, Malik picked up his harmonica again and played a tune. It was rough, uneven, but full of soul. "Mama used to say music keeps the heart warm," he said, "even when your stomach's empty." Ethan smiled faintly. "She sounds like she was a smart woman." "The smartest," Malik said proudly. "She used to sing to me every night, even when she was tired. Said no matter how broke you are, your love don't cost a thing." Ethan nodded, staring at the boy. That one line stayed with him. Love doesn't cost a thing. He thought of all the times he had tried to buy happiness, with luxury, with power, with things. But this boy with nothing understood life better than anyone he'd ever met. Malik noticed Ethan's silence. "You think a lot, huh?" Ethan chuckled. "You could say that." "Thinking's good," Malik said, "but not if it stops you from feeling." Ethan raised his eyebrows. "Where'd you learn that?" Malik shrugged, smiling. Mama, she said, don't let your brain talk your heart out of doing good. The simplicity of it cut deep. Ethan had spent decades doing exactly that, overthinking kindness until it turned into transactions. He'd built charities and called them impact projects, but deep down, they were just good par. Malik, on the other hand, gave away half a sandwich without thinking twice. They talked for hours. Malik told stories about people he'd met on the streets, a woman who painted beautiful art on cardboard, a man who wrote poetry on napkins, a busker who could play any song on an old guitar with only 3 strings. Everyone out here's got a story, he said. Most folks just don't care to listen. That line stung, because Ethan had been that person. He'd walked past people like Malik 100 times without ever stopping. In his world, numbers mattered, profits, growth, market shares. But on the streets, what mattered was simple. One meal, one smile, one small act of kindness. As the night deepened, Malik yawned. You can sleep here if you want. Cops don't usually bother us till morning. Thanks, Ethan said. But won't it be cold? Malik smirked. Cold's just another kind of hug from the sky. Ethan laughed. That's one way to see it. The boy curled up on the bench, pulling his oversized jacket over himself. Don't worry, he mumbled, eyes half closed. You'll get used to it. Ethan watched him drift off to sleep, his face peaceful despite the chill in the air. He pulled his own blanket around him, staring up at the dark city skyline. From down here, it looked different. The skyscrapers no longer symbolized ambition. They looked like walls between worlds. He thought about the people inside those towers, sipping wine, celebrating deals, complaining about traffic. They were warm, safe, and blind to the stories unfolding just below their feet. At that moment, Ethan understood something profound. Success had made him rich, but comfort had made him blind. He whispered to himself, what am I even chasing anymore? Malik stirred in his sleep and murmured, Mama used to say, if you gotta ask what you're chasing, you're probably chasing the wrong thing. Ethan froze. The boy was talking in his sleep, but the words hit like a truth he'd been running from all his life. He leaned back, staring at the stars barely visible through the haze. For the first time in decades, he felt small, but not in a bad way. Small in a way that reminded him he was still human. By morning, Malik was already awake, warming his hands over a small fire in a metal can. Morning, Mr. Ethan, he said cheerfully. Morning, Malik, Ethan replied, stretching. You hungry? There's a soup truck a few blocks down. They give free bowls if you smile nice. Ethan laughed. A smile discount, huh? Yep, Malik said proudly. Works every time. They walked together through the cold streets, talking and laughing like old friends. Ethan watched as Malik greeted people by name, street vendors, other homeless folks, even police officers. He seemed to know everyone. You really like people, don't you? Ethan asked. Malik nodded. Yeah, 'cause people make the world spin. Money just makes it spin faster. Ethan chuckled. That's actually kind of brilliant. Malik shrugged. Mama said it first. As they reached the soup truck, Ethan realized something powerful. This boy, who had every reason to hate the world, had chosen to love it instead. And standing there, holding a steaming bowl of soup handed out by a smiling volunteer, Ethan realized that maybe, just maybe, Malik was about to teach him how to live again. Ethan had spent decades thinking he understood people. He'd hired thousands, negotiated with the best, and stood across from presidents and billionaires. But none of them had taught him more about humanity than this 10-year-old boy in a torn jacket. Over the next few days, Ethan followed Malik's routine. Every morning began the same way. The sound of pigeons flapping overhead, the distant hum of traffic, and Malik's harmonica echoing softly through the air. It became their little alarm clock, their music of survival. They walked from one side of the city to the other, scavenging for food and warmth. Sometimes they waited in line for sandwiches from local charities. Sometimes they searched through bins behind diners when no one was looking. For Ethan, each moment was a shock. He had once sat in conference rooms that smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee. Now he waited outside soup kitchens that smelled of hope and struggle. Yet, amid all that hardship, Malik never lost a smile. He greeted every stranger like a friend, shared jokes with other homeless folks, and somehow always found a reason to laugh. One morning, after a long, sleepless night on a park bench, Ethan asked, "Malik, how do you stay so happy out here?" The boy looked up from the harmonica he was polishing and said, "Why wouldn't I be?" Ethan stared at him. "You're cold, hungry, and alone." Malik shrugged. "I'm alive. That's enough to be happy about." Ethan couldn't respond. He just watched the boy's small hands move across the harmonica, still smiling despite the wind biting through his jacket. Later that day, they found a dry spot under a bridge to rest. The city above rumbled with life. Cars honking, people shouting, sirens wailing, but down there it was like another world, a forgotten one. As they sat together, a man with a gruff voice passed by. "Got $1?" he asked. Malik immediately reached into his pocket and handed him a quarter. "It's all I got, but maybe it helps." The man smiled, surprised. "Thanks, kid." After he left, Ethan turned to Malik. "You gave away your last coin?" Malik shrugged again. "He needed it more than me." Ethan frowned. "But you don't even know him." Malik smiled softly. "Don't gotta know someone to care." That line hit Ethan deep. He thought of all the times he'd signed donation checks to impress investors, all the charity galas where people in diamonds pretended to care for causes they'd never touch. Malik gave with no audience, no reward, just heart. That night, as rain began to fall, they huddled under a piece of cardboard. The drops hit the ground in rhythmic beats, like a slow, sad song. Ethan's teeth chattered. "Malik," he said through the cold, "aren't you scared?" "Of what?" Malik asked. "Of this. Living like this. The danger. The hunger. The nights." Malik looked at him seriously, his voice calm. "Sometimes. But my mama used to say, fear's like a shadow. The more you run from it, the bigger it gets. But if you turn and face it, it shrinks." Ethan stared at him, stunned. "You're wise beyond your years." Malik grinned. "Nah, I just listened to my mama's voice in my head. She never stops talking." Ethan laughed despite the cold. It was the kind of laugh that came from somewhere deep, somewhere healing. A few minutes later, Malik spoke again, softer this time. Mama said something else too. She said when life takes your roof, build your own sky. Ethan froze. The words echoed in his mind like thunder. When life takes your roof, build your own sky. He looked up at the night above, no ceiling, no walls, just a blanket of clouds reflecting the city's orange glow. And suddenly he understood. For years, he'd lived under ceilings, glass ones, golden ones, ceilings made of pride, money, and expectations. But Malik, this boy with nothing, lived in the open sky, free, limitless, alive. Ethan whispered, "Your mom sounds like a remarkable woman." Malik smiled proudly. She said people spend too much time looking down at what they lost instead of looking up at what they still got. Ethan's heart tightened. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a billionaire or a failed soul searcher. He just felt human, vulnerable, curious, alive. Days turned into weeks. The streets became his classroom, Malik his unexpected teacher. They shared everything, scraps of food, laughter, stories. Malik showed Ethan which shelters had the kindest volunteers, which corners were safe to sleep on, and where to find leftover bread behind the bakery at closing time. One afternoon, while resting in the park, Ethan said, "Malik, what do you want to be when you grow up?" Malik didn't even hesitate. A music teacher. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Why that?" The boy smiled. "'Cause music makes people feel stuff. When you feel, you remember you're alive." Ethan nodded slowly, thinking of his own empire, built not on feeling, but on logic and profit. "You'd make a great one." Malik laughed. "Only if I get a harmonica that's not busted." Ethan chuckled. "You'll get one someday. I promise." Malik grinned. "You can't make promises out here, mister. Life don't always keep 'em." "Maybe not," Ethan said softly, "but people can." The boy looked at him, eyes full of warmth. "Then maybe you're different." That evening, They sat by a small fire shared with a few others. A woman with missing teeth told jokes that made everyone laugh. A man sang off-key but with passion. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt part of something real. There were no deals, no titles, no pressure, just people surviving together, with kindness as their currency. As the fire crackled, Malik leaned against Ethan's arm and whispered, "You know what's funny? I used to think rich people never felt cold, that they had magic coats or something." Ethan smiled. "Sometimes they're colder on the inside than you'd think." Malik nodded sleepily. "Yeah, but you're different. You got warm eyes." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. No one had said something like that to him in decades. He looked down at the boy who was now half asleep, his head resting on his arm. Something inside Ethan shifted. A small flame of purpose lit up, one that felt purer. He didn't know how or when, but he knew this boy was changing him. Not with lessons from books, not with business advice, but with something far deeper, humanity. He reached over, gently covering Malik with his own jacket. The city roared above, but under that bridge, it was quiet, peaceful. Ethan whispered to himself, "Maybe I've been chasing the wrong kind of rich." He stared into the fading fire and thought of Malik's mother's words again, "Build your own sky." And in that cold, forgotten corner of the city, surrounded by strangers who had nothing, but still gave everything, Ethan realized that the richest thing a person could ever own was love. Ethan woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the cardboard roof they had built the night before. The air was cold, his clothes damp, but when he turned and saw Malik snoring softly beside him, bundled in his oversized jacket, he couldn't help but smile. It had been weeks since he had left his mansion behind, and for the first time he didn't wake up thinking about meetings, profits, or emails. He woke up thinking about Malik. The boy had become his anchor in this strange, raw world, teaching him how to survive without money, how to share without calculation, and how to smile without reason. But that morning felt different. The rain wasn't just washing the streets. It was washing something inside Ethan, too. He looked at his reflection in a puddle, messy hair, unshaven face, and tired eyes that still carried a strange spark. The billionaire in him was fading, and the man he truly was emerging. Malik stirred awake, yawning. "Morning, Mr. E." Ethan chuckled. "You always find a nickname for me." "That's what friends do," Malik said proudly. "You don't look like a Mr. Ethan anymore. You look like a Mr. E, mysterious and scruffy." Ethan laughed out loud, his voice echoing under the bridge. "Scruffy? That's a new look, huh?" Malik shrugged with a grin. "Looks real." That word, real, stuck in Ethan's mind. He had lived a lifetime surrounded by fakes. Fake smiles, fake loyalty, fake love. Every handshake came with a hidden motive. Every compliment carried an invoice. But here, with Malik, everything was real. The laughter, the hunger, the struggle, all of it. Later that day, they went to a local community kitchen where volunteers served free meals. The line stretched down the block. Families, veterans, children, all waiting quietly in the drizzle. When Ethan stepped into that line, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Humility. He remembered all those times he'd driven by these same kinds of lines in his black limousine, eyes glued to his phone, pretending not to see. But now he was one of them. Not out of pity, but out of purpose. Inside, a kind woman handed Malik a bowl of soup. "Here you go, sweetheart." Malik smiled. "Thank you, ma'am." Then Ethan received his bowl, lukewarm but comforting. They sat together on a bench, steam rising between them. As they ate, Ethan noticed a group of volunteers laughing together as they served food. They looked tired, but their faces glowed with purpose. Malik noticed, too. They're always so happy. Ethan nodded slowly. Maybe because they're giving. Malik sipped his soup. "You think giving makes people happy?" Ethan looked around at the hungry faces, then back at the volunteers. "I think it makes them feel alive." Malik tilted his head. "You ever give like that, Mr. E? Not money, but you?" Ethan paused, spoon in midair. That question hit harder than he expected. He thought of all the donations he'd made, millions to hospitals, schools, causes. But never once had he served a meal or held a hand, or looked into the eyes of the people he claimed to help. "I guess not." he admitted softly. Malik smiled. Maybe it's time to try. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the streets, and Malik slept beside him, curled up and peaceful. Ethan stared at the city skyline glowing faintly in the distance, his old world. The one made of glass towers and gated walls. He realized he had spent his whole life building walls around himself, to protect his money, his name, his heart. But Malik lived without walls. And somehow, he was freer than anyone Ethan had ever met. The next morning, Ethan decided to do something different. "Come on, Malik," he said, nudging the boy awake. "We're going to the corner by the old bakery." Malik rubbed his eyes. "Why?" "You'll see." When they got there, Ethan took a deep breath. He picked up a cardboard sign from a trash pile and grabbed a marker from his pocket. Malik watched curiously as Ethan wrote something on it. Then Ethan turned it around. It read, "Free hugs and smiles, no money needed." Malik blinked. "You're kidding, right?" Ethan grinned. "Nope. Let's see what happens." For the first few minutes, people just walked by, confused or pretending not to see. Some laughed, some frowned. But then an elderly woman stopped. She looked at Ethan, tears in her eyes, and said, "I could use a hug today." Ethan stood up and hugged her gently. She whispered, "Thank you," and walked away smiling. Then a man in a suit came by, chuckled, and said, "You're a brave old man," before shaking Ethan's hand. Within an hour, they had hugged a dozen strangers. Malik even joined in, giving his many hugs to kids and laughing every time someone smiled back. By the end of the day, Ethan's sign was soggy, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. As they walked back, Malik said, "You looked happy today, Mr. E." Ethan nodded. "I was. It felt good to give something that doesn't cost a thing." Malik smirked. "Told you. Giving makes you feel alive." Ethan looked at him and smiled. "You're right, teacher." The boy laughed. "Hey, I like that." "Teacher Malik." "Sounds perfect," Ethan said warmly. "One day, you'll have your own music class. Maybe even a stage." Malik laughed again. "You dream big, Mr. E." Ethan looked up at the stars breaking through the night sky. "I used to dream about money, but now I dream about meaning." Malik tilted his head. "Meaning?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, the kind of things that stay after the money's gone." For a while, they walked in silence. The world around them was rough, dirty, cold, but something about it felt honest. When they reached their usual sleeping spot, Malik lay down, shivering slightly. Ethan took off his jacket and covered him again. Malik whispered, "You don't have to do that every night." Ethan smiled softly. "I know, but I want to." "Why?" Malik asked sleepily. "Because it reminds me I still have something to give." The boy's eyes fluttered closed. "You already gave more than you know." Ethan sat there, staring at the sleeping child, his chest tightening with emotion. He realized he had come to the streets thinking he was going to learn something about poverty. But instead, he was learning about humanity. He whispered to himself, "I used to own the world, but I never felt it." And as the city lights shimmered in the puddles, Ethan understood the truth. You can lose every dollar you've ever earned. A few more weeks passed, and the city's winter chill began to bite harder. The nights grew longer, and even the fires under the bridges struggled to stay alive. For most, this was just another harsh season. But for Ethan, it was something else entirely. A test. He had once controlled empires worth billions. Now, he couldn't even control the wind that blew through the holes in his shoes. But strangely, he didn't hate it. In fact, he felt alive. Malik was still the same bright spark. His harmonica tunes now echoed through the alleys like little bursts of sunshine cutting through gray clouds. Every morning, he played the same melody, soft, hopeful, and full of life. One day, as they sat on a bench near the park, Malik said, "You ever miss it, Mr. E? You know, being rich." Ethan looked at the boy, smiling faintly. "Sometimes. But then I remember what I used to feel when I had it all." Malik tilted his head. "And what's that?" "Empty," Ethan said quietly. The boy blinked. "Empty?" But you had everything. Ethan nodded. That's the problem. Everything I had was outside me, not inside. Malik was silent for a moment, then softly said, Guess you're filling up now, huh? Ethan chuckled. Yeah, kid, one smile at a time. That evening, as they sat by the old bakery, a delivery truck pulled up. The driver tossed out several trash bags of day-old pastries. Malik jumped up, excited. Dinner time, he said, running to grab a few bags before the others came. Ethan helped him sort through them, muffins, croissants, and a few still warm loaves. Malik handed one to a woman with torn gloves, another to a man sleeping on cardboard. You get a piece, you give a piece, he said. Ethan smiled. That simple act, sharing, had become Malik's way of living. Later that night, Ethan sat awake long after Malik fell asleep, his mind racing. He couldn't stop thinking about everything he had left behind, not the money, but the power to change lives. Here he was, living among people who had been forgotten by the world, and he had the means to do something about it. But how could he? He'd promised himself to live this experiment honestly, to strip away his identity, his privilege, his ego. Yet the longer he stayed, the harder it became to ignore the suffering around him. That's when an idea formed. Quiet at first, like a whisper in the back of his mind. He would help them, but he wouldn't do it as Ethan Price, the billionaire. He would do it as Mr. E, the homeless man who shared their nights, their laughter, and their hunger. The next morning, he told Malik he needed to take a walk alone. Malik frowned. You okay, Mr. E? Ethan smiled. Yeah, just need to think. He walked to an area of the city where he knew no one would recognize him. Then, using a public library computer, he logged into an old email under a fake name he had used years ago for privacy. Within minutes, he was in touch with his former assistant. Discreetly, of course. He sent instructions. No press, no signatures, no attention. Just quiet help. A few days later, new blankets began showing up near the bridge. A charity van arrived with food. Volunteers started appearing where there had been none before. The people under that bridge thought it was luck. Malik thought it was a Christmas miracle. But Ethan just smiled, watching from the corner as Malik danced around, handing out soup cups and blankets. You see this, Mr. E? Malik said, his face glowing. Somebody out there cares. Ethan looked at the boy and said softly, Yeah, somebody does. He wanted to tell him the truth. He wanted Malik to know that the help wasn't random, that it came from someone who loved this community more than words could say. But he couldn't. Not yet. The joy on Malik's face was pure, untouched by pride or pity. And Ethan didn't want to steal that. That night, as they sat together near the fire, Malik played his harmonica again, this time a new tune. What's that one called? Ethan asked. Malik smiled. Hope. Ethan chuckled. You wrote it? Yeah, I made it for everyone who's waiting for something better. Ethan's throat tightened. He stared into the flames, thinking about how a 10-year-old boy who had nothing could still be filled with so much hope, while men with billions walked around feeling lost. Malik, he said softly, what's the first thing you'd do if life ever gave you everything you wanted? Malik laughed. Easy. I'd buy a new harmonica, one that never breaks. Ethan smiled. Just that? Yeah, the boy said, and maybe a big table so everyone could eat together. Ethan looked at him, really looked. You know, Malik, you might not realize it, but you already have the kind of wealth most people spend their whole lives chasing. Malik frowned. Wealth? Me? Ethan nodded. Yeah, you give, you love, you hope. That's real wealth. The boy smiled sheepishly, not fully understanding, but appreciating the warmth in Ethan's voice. Days passed. The bridge community started to change. There were fewer sick people, more food, and a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. Ethan kept sending help quietly, never taking credit, never revealing his hand. But one evening, Malik noticed something. As they were walking near a store window, the news was playing on a small TV inside. A reporter said, Anonymous donations continue to transform the city's homeless districts. Authorities have no clues behind the sudden generosity. Malik turned to Ethan, his eyes wide. You think it's one of those rich guys? Ethan smiled, hiding a laugh. Maybe, Or maybe it's someone who just cares a lot. Malik grinned. Well, whoever it is, they're awesome. Ethan nodded. Yeah, they are. He said it with a quiet pride that Malik never noticed. Later that night, Malik fell asleep faster than usual. His small body was wrapped in a new blanket, one that Ethan had arranged to have delivered that morning. Ethan sat beside him, staring into the darkness. The boy's breathing was steady, peaceful. Ethan felt something stir in his chest. Not guilt, not sadness, something deeper. It was love. The kind of love that doesn't come from blood or obligation, but from connection, from shared pain and shared laughter. He whispered, almost to himself, "You saved me, kid." He didn't realize it then, but those words were the truth. Malik had given him something that no amount of money ever could: purpose. And as Ethan leaned back against the cold concrete wall, he realized something else. Maybe giving up his fortune wasn't losing everything. Maybe it was finally finding what really mattered. Winter in the city had turned brutal. The cold wasn't just a feeling. It was a living thing, creeping through cracks, biting at skin, stealing warmth wherever it could. The nights grew harsher, the air so icy that even the fires on the bridge struggled to stay alive. Ethan and Malik still stuck together, sharing stories, laughter, and whatever food they could find. But Ethan couldn't ignore what he'd started noticing: Malik's cough. It had begun small, just a dry sound every now and then. But now, it came deep and sharp, the kind that made Ethan's stomach twist every time he heard it. One night, Malik tried to hide it, pressing his sleeve to his mouth. But the sound came again, rougher this time. Ethan frowned. "That cough's getting worse, Malik." "I'm fine," the boy said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just the cold." Ethan touched his forehead. Warm. Too warm. "You got a fever." Malik shook his head stubbornly. "It's nothing, Mr. E. I don't get sick." Ethan stared at him, heart aching. "Everybody gets sick, kid, especially out here." But Malik just gave that same brave grin, the one that always made Ethan feel both proud and terrified. "Don't worry. I'm tough." That night, Malik barely ate. He lay curled up under his blanket, shivering. Ethan wrapped his own jacket around him again, holding him close. "You're going to be okay," he whispered. But the words fell hollow against the sound of Malik's uneven breathing. Ethan didn't sleep at all. He sat there watching the boy's chest rise and fall, counting every breath like it might be the last. By morning, Malik was worse. His lips were pale, his face clammy. He tried to sit up, but his small body shook. "I can't feel my hands," he whispered. Panic surged through Ethan's veins. He'd faced boardroom crises, billion-dollar meltdowns, and ruthless investors. But nothing compared to fear of losing this boy. He didn't care about his secret anymore. He didn't care about the experiment. He just wanted Malik to live. "Stay here," Ethan said, standing up fast. "I'm going to get help." Malik grabbed his sleeve weakly. "No, Mr. E, they don't help people like us." Ethan knelt, his eyes wet. "They will. Trust me." He ran through the streets, his heart pounding. Snowflakes slapped against his face, melting into cold tears. Every hospital he passed felt both close and far, because walking in there meant revealing who he really was. But none of that mattered anymore. He burst into the nearest emergency room, drenched and shivering. The nurse behind the desk looked up, startled. "Sir, are you?" "There's a boy," Ethan gasped. "He's sick. Fever, cough, shaking. He needs help now." The nurse nodded, professional but cautious. "Where is he?" "Under the bridge off 9th and Willow," Ethan said quickly. The nurse hesitated. "Sir, we can't send a team out there unless..." Ethan slammed his hand on the counter. "Then I'll pay for myself." She blinked. "Pay." Ethan froze. His mind raced. Then he took a deep breath. "My name's Ethan Price." The nurse's eyes widened. The name traveled like lightning. Within seconds, another staff member rushed over. "Ethan Price? The Ethan Price." Ethan didn't flinch. "Yes. Now, please, send an ambulance. The boy doesn't have time." Minutes later, Sirens wailed to the cold air as paramedics followed Ethan back to the bridge. Malik was still there, curled up and barely conscious. His small fingers gripped the harmonica like a lifeline. When he saw Ethan running toward him, he smiled weakly. "You came back." Ethan dropped to his knees beside him. "I told you I would." Paramedics lifted Malik gently. He tried to protest, but his voice was too weak. "I don't want to go, they'll just—" Ethan held his hand tight. "Sure, I'm right here. You're safe." As the ambulance sped through the city, Ethan sat beside Malik, holding his hand. Machines beeped, lights flashed, and Ethan's mind spun with guilt. He should have seen this coming. He should have protected him. When they reached the hospital, doctors rushed the boy into the emergency room. Ethan tried to follow, but a nurse stopped him. "Sir, you'll have to wait outside." He nodded, helpless, pacing back and forth as minutes turned to hours. Every sound from the hallway, every door, every shout made his chest tighten. Finally, the doctor came out. His face was tired but calm. "He's stable for now," he said. "Pneumonia. Severe but treatable." Ethan's knees almost gave out from relief. "Can I see him?" The doctor nodded. "He's asleep, but yes." He kept mumbling your name. When Ethan walked into the room, Malik was lying in a hospital bed, covered in white sheets, a small oxygen mask over his face. The sound of the machine beside him was steady but fragile. Ethan sat down and took his hand. "Hey, kid," he whispered. "You scared me to death." Malik opened his eyes just a little. "Told you I was tough." Ethan smiled through tears. "Yeah, tougher than me." The boy looked around the room. "This place is fancy." Ethan chuckled. "Yeah, well, I know some people." Malik frowned faintly, confusion in his eyes. "Mister E, who are you?" Ethan froze. For weeks, he'd hidden the truth, that he wasn't just another man on the streets. But now, looking at Malik, he couldn't lie anymore. He took a deep breath. "My name's Ethan Price. I used to be someone important, someone with a lot of money." Malik blinked slowly. "You're rich?" Ethan nodded. "I was, but I walked away from it all because I didn't know what life meant anymore. I thought money could buy happiness. I was wrong." The boy's voice was soft. "So you came here?" "To us." Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah, and I met the only teacher I ever needed." Malik frowned. "Teacher?" Ethan squeezed his hand gently. You taught me what it means to live and to care." The boy's eyes shimmered. "I didn't teach you nothing, Mr. E." Ethan shook his head. "You taught me everything." Malik smiled weakly. "Guess that makes me rich, too." Ethan laughed, his voice breaking. "Yeah, richer than anyone I know." The nurse stepped in quietly. "He needs rest now." Ethan nodded, leaning forward to whisper, "Get some sleep, champ. I'll be right here." As Malik drifted off, Ethan sat there, holding his hand, staring at the boy who had unknowingly healed his soul. He looked around a sterile hospital room, bright lights, clean walls, the hum of machines, and realized how hollow all this would feel without him. He'd once built towers that touched the clouds. But the only thing that truly reached heaven was this small, fragile bond between a broken man and a hopeful boy. Ethan whispered to himself, "I don't care if I lose everything again. I won't lose him." And that night, for the first time in his life, Ethan Price, the man who once thought he could buy the world, prayed. Not for wealth, not for success, but for a little boy's heartbeat to keep going. The next morning, Charles woke up to the faint sound of the city beginning to move. Distant car engines, clattering trash cans, a baby crying somewhere behind a thin apartment wall. He turned his head and saw Jamal sitting by a flickering candle, carefully folding a small paper airplane. Charles sat up, shivering from a morning chill that crept through the cracks in the abandoned building. "You're up early," he murmured, rubbing his arms. Jamal smiled faintly, not looking up. "Couldn't sleep. Sometimes when it's quiet like this, I just like to make things. It helps me dream." That line, "It helps me dream," struck Charles deeply. Here was a boy with almost nothing, still finding ways to dream. Charles had spent his whole life chasing success, thinking dreams only mattered if they came with numbers, profits, or applause. But Jamal, he was proof that dreams didn't need wealth. They just needed hope. Charles leaned back against the wall. "So, what are you dreaming about today?" Jamal's fingers paused over the paper. "About flying," he said softly. "One day, I'm going to be a pilot. I'll take off from this city and fly anywhere I want. Maybe I'll even have my own plane. Big one, with my name on it." Charles smiled, but it wasn't a condescending smile. It was admiration. "That's a big dream." "Yeah," Jamal said, grinning. "But big dreams don't cost nothing, so I can afford them." They both laughed. But behind that laugh, Charles felt something shift inside him. A small crack opening in the wall he'd built around his heart. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about money or stocks or the next deal. He was thinking about this boy's courage to dream, despite everything against him. As the day unfolded, Jamal showed Charles around his world, a world invisible to most people walking by. They visited an old soup kitchen tucked behind a church, where the volunteers served with tired smiles. Charles was surprised when Jamal didn't just eat and leave. He stayed to help clean up. "Why do you do that?" Charles asked, puzzled. "You're not getting anything out of it." Jamal shrugged. "They feed me when I got nothing. Least I can do is help. My mama used to say, if you got two hands, you got no excuse not to use one for someone else." That line echoed in Charles's head all day. He couldn't stop thinking about it. If you got two hands, you got no excuse not to use one for someone else. He'd spent decades with both hands holding everything: money, power, property. But how often had he reached them out to help someone? By noon, Charles followed Jamal to a small park nearby. The air was heavy with humidity, and children were playing around a rusted fountain. Jamal sat on a bench, watching them. "You come here a lot?" Charles asked. "Yeah," Jamal said. "Sometimes I just sit here and think about life, about people." He looked up at Charles. "You know what I've noticed?" "What's that?" "People with money, they walk fast, always in a hurry. They don't look around much. But the people who ain't got nothing, they always got time to talk, time to smile." Charles went silent. He'd been one of those people, moving too fast to notice anything. Not the trees, not the sky, not the people behind the glass of his car window. He'd mistaken movement for meaning. Jamal kicked a small stone inside. "When my mama died, people walked by me like I didn't exist. But one man stopped, just one. He gave me half a sandwich. I never forgot that. It was the first time I realized kindness was like fire. It spreads." Charles looked at him, eyes soft. "You're a wise kid, Jamal." Jamal grinned. "Nah, I just see things." They sat there for a long time, the afternoon sun painting the world gold. It was a silence that didn't feel empty. It felt full, like both of them were learning from each other, without needing to say a word. Later that day, Jamal brought Charles to a spot under a bridge, a makeshift camp where a few homeless people gathered. A woman was singing softly, her voice trembling but beautiful. A man strummed a guitar with missing strings. A few others were sharing stories, laughing over the smallest jokes. Charles stood there, watching them. They had nothing, no fancy clothes, no homes. But the warmth between them was something money could never buy. Then Jamal handed Charles a paper plate with beans and bread. "Eat, Mr. Charles. You need energy." Charles chuckled. "I used to have people serve me on silver plates. Now I'm being fed under a bridge." Jamal smiled. "See? The view's better down here." They both laughed again, and for the first time in years, Charles felt alive. Not rich, not powerful, just alive. As night fell, a small fire flickered in the center of the group. Everyone sat close, sharing pieces of their past, stories of loss, laughter, and resilience. When it was Charles's turn, he hesitated. "I used to have everything," he began slowly. "But I didn't realize how empty I was until I gave it all away. I thought I'd learn how to survive like you. Instead, I'm learning how to live." The group went quiet. Then Jamal, sitting beside him, nudged his arm gently. "You're doing good, Mr. Charles. Better than you think." Charles smiled. Because of you, Jamal. Jamal tilted his head. Nah, man, because you finally started seeing people, not just things. That night, as they lay on flattened cardboard beneath the stars, Charles couldn't sleep. The sound of the city echoed in the distance, but his mind was on Jamal. This boy, this poor homeless boy. The next morning, the city woke slowly. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the broken windows, painting faint lines across the cold concrete floor. Charles sat up, his back aching, but his heart oddly light. Jamal was gone. At first, he thought the boy had just gone to find breakfast or water. But hours passed. The usual laughter, the chatter, the little hums Jamal used to make. None of it came back. Charles felt a sudden, sinking feeling in his stomach. He looked around the empty space, then stepped out into the street. The morning air carried the smell of rain and gasoline, and everything seemed too quiet. Jamal, he called out. His voice echoed down the empty alley. Jamal. No answer. Panic started to build. He ran toward the soup kitchen where they usually ate, his worn shoes slapping against the wet pavement. Inside, a woman behind the counter recognized him immediately. You looking for the kid? She asked softly. Charles froze. You've seen him. The woman sighed and pointed toward the back. He was here early. He passed out before breakfast even started. Someone called an ambulance. They took him to Mercy General. Charles didn't even wait for her to finish. He bolted out the door. He ran for blocks, through puddles and traffic, until he finally saw the faded red cross of Mercy General Hospital. He pushed through the revolving doors, out of breath, soaked and trembling. At the front desk, a nurse looked him up and down, his dirty clothes, unshaven face, the smell of street life clinging to him. I'm looking for a boy named Jamal. Charles panted. He's about 12, short, dark-skinned, bright smile. They said he was brought here. The nurse checked her list, then nodded slowly. Yes, he's here. Room 214. But you're not family? Charles hesitated. What could he say? That he was a billionaire pretending to be homeless, who met a boy that changed his life? That he'd given away everything and found something more valuable in return? He swallowed hard. I'm a friend. The nurse studied his face for a moment, then softened. Go ahead, she said quietly. But please be gentle. He's not doing so well. Charles's heart dropped. He walked down the long white hallway, each step echoing louder than the last. Room 214. The door was half open. He stepped in, and there he was, Jamal, lying on the bed, his tiny body looking even smaller under the white hospital sheets. An oxygen tube ran under his nose. His skin looked pale. Charles approached slowly, his throat tightening. Hey, kid, he whispered. You scared me. Jamal opened his eyes weakly. Mr. Charles. His voice was barely a whisper. Sorry, I didn't mean to disappear. Charles forced a smile, blinking back tears. Don't you ever apologize for that. You just gave me a heart attack, that's all. Jamal tried to chuckle, but it came out as a cough. Guess I still got it. A nurse entered quietly, checking his vitals. He's dehydrated, anemic, she said softly. He's been living rough for too long. We're doing what we can. Charles nodded, barely able to speak. As the nurse left, he sat beside Jamal and took his hand. It was cold and fragile, like holding a bird's wing. You're going to be fine, Jamal, Charles said, trying to sound confident. You hear me? We'll get you better. And then we'll make that airplane real. Remember? You're going to fly. Jamal smiled faintly. I like that dream, he whispered. But maybe you can fly for me first. Charles shook his head, tears escaping his eyes now. Don't talk like that, Jamal. You're stronger than you think. You survived things most people couldn't handle. Jamal's eyes fluttered. You know what's funny, Mr. Charles? I used to think rich people had everything. But you're proof that maybe we all need the same thing. Charles frowned softly. What's that? Someone to care. Those 3 words hit Charles harder than anything in his life. Someone to care. He had millions once, thousands of employees, dozens of people who pretended to care. As long as his checks cleared, But this boy, who owned nothing but hope, had given him something no one else ever did: unconditional kindness. Charles squeezed his hand tighter. "I care, Jamal. I promise you that." Jamal smiled again, eyes glassy. "I know you do. That's why I wanted you to see what it's like down here. Not all poor folks are broken. Some of us just got lost for a bit." He paused, his breathing shallow. "Promise me something, Mr. Charles." "Anything. When I'm gone, don't go back to that empty life. Don't hide behind money again. Use it. Build something that helps. Something for kids like me." Charles felt his chest ache. "Don't talk about being gone," he whispered. "You're going to be right there with me, kid." Jamal closed his eyes. "Maybe, but if I can't, you still promise?" Tears streamed down Charles's face. He nodded slowly. "I promise." The heart monitor beeped steadily. The world seemed to slow down. Charles sat there for hours, holding his hand, telling him stories about the world, about flying, about second chances. By evening, Jamal was asleep again. The doctor came in, adjusting the machines, whispering updates Charles couldn't even process. All he could do was sit and wait. When night fell, the hospital quieted. Charles leaned back, exhausted, watching the moonlight spill across the room. He thought about every deal he ever made, every contract he ever signed, and realized none of it mattered. What mattered was this moment, the boy in the bed, the lesson in his words. At around 3 a.m., Jamal stirred. His eyes opened slightly. "Mr. Charles?" "I'm here," Charles said quickly, leaning forward. Jamal smiled weakly. "You kept your promise. You stayed." "I'm not going anywhere," Charles whispered. Jamal's small hand squeezed his one last time. "Then you're already rich again." And then silence. The monitor flatlined softly. The room filled with a cold stillness that words could never describe. Charles froze, his chest collapsing inward. "No, no, no, no," he muttered. He pressed his forehead to Jamal's hand. "You can't go yet. You were supposed to fly." The nurse rushed in, then the doctor. They worked, tried, and finally stopped. "I'm sorry," the doctor said quietly. Charles didn't move. He couldn't. Hours later, he walked out of the hospital under the fading night sky, the streets empty and cold. In his hand, he held Jamal's little paper airplane, crumpled, soft, and full of meaning. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "You're flying now, kid, higher than any of us." And in that moment, Charles knew what he had to do next. He had to keep his promise. He had to make Jamal's dream and his lesson live forever. Months passed after Jamal's death, but the memory of that boy never left Charles for a single day. Every morning, he'd wake up hearing that soft voice again. "Don't go back to that empty life. Build something that helps." Those words became his mission. Charles returned to his old world. The marble floors, the glass towers, the endless handshakes. But he wasn't the same man who left it. He no longer saw boardrooms as places of power. He saw them as tools that could change lives if used with purpose. He began selling off what he didn't need: luxury cars, vacation homes, art collections. Every dollar went toward a single dream, the Jamal Foundation for Hope. Its mission was simple: to help homeless and underprivileged kids get the education, safety, and opportunities they deserved. Kids with big dreams but no wings. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Charles stood before a crowd of reporters, investors, and curious onlookers. Behind him, the new community center gleamed. Bright murals painted by local kids, a small garden, classrooms filled with computers and books. He stepped up to the microphone, took a deep breath, and said, "A young boy once told me that big dreams don't cost a thing, so anyone can afford them. I didn't understand that back then, but now I do. His name was Jamal, and this center, this dream, is for him." The crowd went silent. Even the cameras seemed to pause. Charles continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I once thought being rich meant having more. But real wealth isn't measured by what you keep. It's measured by what you give away. This foundation isn't charity. It's a promise that no child will ever be invisible again." The applause that followed wasn't just polite. It was heartfelt. People could feel that this man had changed. He wasn't speaking for fame or recognition. He was speaking truth. After the ceremony, children from the neighborhood rushed inside, their laughter echoing through the halls. Charles stood in the doorway, smiling as they played, read, and shared stories. For the first time in his life, he felt peace. He walked into one of the classrooms, where a little boy was drawing airplanes on a piece of paper. Charles knelt down beside him. "What's it you're working on?" he asked. The boy grinned. "My plane. One day I'm going to fly it." Charles's throat tightened. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus." The boy replied proudly. "My mama says if I believe in it, it's already halfway true." Charles smiled, eyes glistening. "She's right, Marcus. And maybe one day you'll take me for a ride." The boy laughed, showing a gap-toothed smile. "Deal." As Charles stood up, he looked out the window, and for a moment, he could almost see Jamal there, sitting on that old park bench, folding another paper airplane, smiling that same quiet smile. He whispered, "You're flying again, kid." Weeks turned into months. The foundation grew. It expanded into multiple cities, offering food, shelter, and education to thousands of children. But more than anything, it gave them hope. Charles personally visited the shelters often, not in a suit, not in polished shoes, but in simple clothes, blending in with the kids. He wanted them to know he wasn't above them. He was one of them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he sat outside the main building, watching kids chase each other across the playground. A woman approached, one of the volunteers. "Mr. Charles, you've changed so many lives," she said softly. "But I have to ask, how did this all start?" He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "With a boy who had nothing except everything I was missing." The woman tilted her head. "And what was that?" "Heart," Charles said simply. He had heart. Silence hung between them for a moment, the kind that says more than words ever could. Later that night, when the place grew quiet, Charles walked to his office, a small room filled with photos of smiling children, and a single frame on his desk, a paper airplane, carefully preserved behind glass. He sat down and took out his old journal, the same one he'd kept during his journey on the streets. He opened it to a blank page and began to write. "Jamal, I hope you can see all of this from wherever you are. You showed me the meaning of life, not through wealth or power, but through kindness. You taught me that a person's worth isn't in their wallet, but in their willingness to care. I kept my promise. The world knows your name now. And every time a child walks into this building with a dream, I see you again, smiling, laughing, believing. You didn't just teach me to help others. You taught me to feel again. Thank you for letting me fly." Tears dotted the page as he set the pen down. He leaned back and looked at the photo again. That small, fragile paper airplane. It had survived the rain, the streets, and the years, just like Jamal's message had survived in his heart. He whispered, "You did it, kid. You're changing the world." The next morning, a news crew arrived to interview Charles about his foundation. The journalist asked, "Mr. Charles, you've given away billions. Don't you ever miss your old life?" Charles smiled warmly. "I still have my old life," he said. "It just finally means something now." The journalist laughed lightly. "So, do you consider yourself poor now?" Charles looked around, at the children running, at the laughter filling the air, at the sunlight glinting off the mural of Jamal's face painted on the wall. "Poor," he said with a chuckle. "No, I've never been richer." As the camera panned out, it caught that mural, Jamal smiling, a paper airplane soaring across a bright blue sky behind him. Charles watched the children from a distance, and in that laughter, he heard Jamal's voice again, echoing softly in his heart. "If you got two hands, you got no excuse not to use one for someone else." He smiled, whispering back, "I'm using both now, Jamal." The scene faded into the orange glow of sunset, a symbol of endings, but also of beginnings. The billionaire who once gave up everything to be homeless had finally found the one thing he'd been searching for all along: purpose. And somewhere beyond the clouds, a little boy was finally flying, free, smiling, proud, because his dream had taken flight in the hearts of thousands. Charles lifted his eyes to the sky and said, "You taught me how to fly, Jamal, and I'll never stop." The camera zoomed out on the mural, bright, hopeful, eternal, as the wind gently carried a real paper airplane to the open courtyard, rising, twirling, disappearing into the light.